At daylight the Sioux peered anxiously toward the grove. It was some time before the little cluster of trees emerged from the shadows. At that moment the Kiowas appeared. "See, there are our enemies," said Sunbird. "Watch sharp," White Otter cautioned him. Although the Kiowas were too far away to be counted, the Sioux saw at once that it was a large company. They felt sure it was a war party. The Kiowas had turned toward the north. White Otter watched them with considerable uneasiness. "It is bad," he said. "There are many warriors. They are riding toward the lodges of my people. We must follow them." Yes, we will follow them," declared Sunbird. They watched closely as the Kiowas rode slowly across the plain. They were a long distance to the westward of the ravine, and were moving directly toward the north. As they drew nearer, the Sioux began to count them. There were 60 horsemen in the company. They made an imposing spectacle as they rode along in pairs. Even at the distance the Sioux noted that some of the warriors in the lead wore great war bonnets, and they knew that those men were chiefs and war leaders. Then several riders left the column and galloped away in advance of the company. "The scouts are going ahead to watch for enemies," said Sunbird. "Hi! They are coming this way," cried White Otter. 2 riders had turned toward the east, and were riding toward the ravine. They were some distance to the southward of the Sioux, but the latter were greatly alarmed. They felt quite certain that the crafty scouts would follow along the top of the ravine to make sure that it was free of foes. The Sioux were in despair. They feared that they had run into a trap. There seemed to be no way of escape. Discovery seemed certain. "They will find us," cried Sunbird. White Otter watched the horsemen in thoughtful silence. He was searching his brain for a way out of the predicament. The scouts had covered 3/4 of the distance to the ravine. Delay was perilous. Roused by the thought, White Otter suddenly determined to race away in full sight of his foes. "Come," he cried, as he scrambled wildly into the ravine. "The Kiowas are coming," Sunbird told. "Little Raven, jump on your ponies and follow me," shouted White Otter. They rode boldly out upon the plain, and turned toward the east. Glancing back they saw that the Kiowas had stopped at sight of them. The scouts made no effort to follow. "It is good," cried White Otter. "The Kiowas do not know what to do. We will fool them." Convinced that their foes had no intention of pursuing them, the Sioux slackened the speed of their ponies. Then, when they had gone a safe distance, they turned to watch the perplexed Kiowas. The latter were gathered in a close group, and appeared to be holding a council. "Well, we are far enough away. Now we will wait here and see what those people propose to do," said White Otter. "Do you believe they know who we are?" Little Raven asked him. "No," replied White Otter. A moment afterward the Kiowas resumed their advance toward the north. The scouts had joined their comrades. White Otter was perplexed. He had expected the war party to turn in another direction. If the Kiowas really were bound for the Ogallala camp, he believed they would attempt to conceal their intentions. The fact that they continued boldly on their way aroused his suspicions. "I do not know what to make of it," he told his companions. "If those people are going to my village, I believe they will turn around to fool us." "I do not believe they know who we are," said Sunbird. "Perhaps they took us for Pawnees or Cheyennes. Perhaps they do not believe we will follow them." "Yes, Yes, I see that what you say is true, White Otter replied, hopefully. They do not know who we are. I believe they take us for Cheyenne hunters. It is good. If they keep going ahead, we will circle around and get ahead of them. Then we will go to tell my people. When the Kiowas come to fight us, we will be waiting for them. The Kiowas had urged their ponies into a canter. The scouts were riding toward the ravine. The Sioux watched curiously. They wondered if the Kiowas intended to ignore them. It is mysterious, White Otter declared suspiciously. My brothers, I believe those people are trying to fool us. We must be sharp. The scouts turned and rode along the top of the ravine, and the war party continued toward the north. Sunbird and Little Raven waited for White Otter to announce his plans. The latter, however, remained silent. He seemed bewildered by the unusual behavior of the Kiowas. He was watching the two scouts. They glanced back at frequent intervals to make sure that the Sioux were not following them. Otherwise they showed little interest. It is mysterious, White Otter said, again. I do not know what to make of it. Come, Sunbird, tell me how you feel about it. The Kiowas are going toward your village. It looks bad, Sunbird told him. We must follow them, said White Otter. Come, we will try to fool them. He rode away toward the east. The two Minneconjou asked no questions. They looked upon him as the leader, and they were content to rely upon his judgment. As they cantered across the plain, they glanced back at the Kiowas. The two scouts had stopped, and appeared to be looking after them. Those scouts are watching us, said Little Raven. It is good, laughed White Otter. We will fool them. Come, ride faster. They galloped the ponies. Then, as they again looked back, they saw that the war party, too, had stopped, far away to the westward. White Otter laughed gleefully. He turned to the southward, toward the ridge which they had left the day before. His companions believed that he was planning some wily stratagem to deceive his foes. Keep watching, cautioned White Otter. Perhaps those scouts will follow us. The Kiowas, however, showed no intention of riding after them. One of the scouts was racing toward the war party. The Sioux believed he had gone for instructions. They kept looking back to see what he would do after he had talked with his companions. See, he is riding back to that gully, cried Little Raven. Perhaps they are going to follow us. No, I do not believe it, said Sunbird. The war party was moving on toward the north. A few moments afterward the scout rejoined his companion. Then they, too, rode northward along the top of the ravine. It was apparent that the Kiowas had decided to pay no further attention to the Sioux. The Kiowas are sly, declared White Otter. I cannot tell what they propose to do. Perhaps they are going to the lodges of my people. Perhaps they are trying to fool us. We must follow them and find out about it. When the Sioux finally reached the ridge, the Kiowas had already disappeared into a dip of the plain. Once over the ridge, White Otter and Sunbird left their ponies with Little Raven and climbed the slope to watch. They had little doubt that the crafty Kiowa scouts were similarly employed far away to the northward. Now I will tell you why I came here, said White Otter. I do not believe the Kiowas know who we are. I believe they take us for scouts. Perhaps they take us for Cheyennes. The Cheyenne village is behind us. I came this way to make them believe we were going there. When those scouts do not see us, they will believe we have gone away. Then they We'll go ahead. We will follow them. It is good, Sunbird told him. They had not watched long, however, before White Otter became impatient. He realized that he was wasting valuable time. He wondered if he had blundered. If the Kiowas really intended to go to the Ogallala camp, he feared that he had given him a big advantage. They were a long distance ahead of him, and he knew that it would be necessary to ride hard to beat them to the goal. The thought shook his confidence. He began to doubt the wisdom of his maneuver. Each moment added to his uncertainty. He studied the plain for a way to follow the war party without being seen. The ridge offered the only opportunity. It extended a considerable distance toward the north, and by riding along the east side of it he believed he might again come in sight of his foes. Come, Sunbird, we will ride along behind this hill, and try to follow the Kiowas, he said. Then Little Raven called, and when they turned they saw him pointing excitedly toward the north. Looking across the plain, they discovered a riderless pony running toward the west. Bring up the ponies. Bring up the ponies, White Otter called, in alarm. They hurried down the ridge and met Little Raven. Then they sprang upon the ponies, and galloped over the ridge. Once over the top, they ran back to watch, while Little Raven took charge of the ponies. 2 horsemen had already appeared in pursuit of the runaway pony. The Sioux realized that they had barely escaped discovery. They did not see us, declared Sunbird. It is good, said White Otter. They watched the race with great interest. The riders soon overtook the pony. Then they turned about and cantered away toward the east. The Sioux looked inquiringly at one another. Who were the strange riders? Where had they come from? Was another war party in the vicinity? The alarming questions flashed through their minds. They were puzzled. I believe it is the Kiowas, White Otter declared, finally. I believe they have turned toward the place where the day begins. Then they must be trying to fool us, said Sunbird. I do not know what they are trying to do, White Otter replied, suspiciously. In the meantime the distant horsemen had disappeared, and the plain seemed free of foes. The Sioux looked toward the east. They examined the tops of the knolls and ridges, and watched closely for dust, but saw nothing to convince them that the war party had gone in that direction. This thing is mysterious, said Sunbird. They realized that they were in an awkward predicament. They knew that if scouts were loitering in the vicinity of the spot where they had last seen the Kiowa war party, it would be perilous to remain on the western side of the ridge. Still, if they crossed the ridge and attempted to advance along the other side, they feared they would be discovered by scouts watching somewhere on that side of the plain. For some moments they were undecided as to just what to do. My brothers, I will tell you how I feel about this thing, Sunbird said, suddenly. If the Kiowas have turned toward the place where the day begins, I do not believe they are going to the lodges of our people. If that is true, it would be foolish to follow them. I believe there are many enemies in this country. We must not stay here. Come, we will ride around and find out if the buffaloes have come into this place. Then we will go back to our people. Sunbird, before we go away we must find out about this thing. White Otter told him, perhaps it is true that the Kiowas are not going to the lodges of my people. We are not sure about it. Perhaps they know who we are. Perhaps they turned around to fool us. Perhaps if we do not follow them they will circle around and come to the lodges of my people. My brothers, we must find Out where those Kiowas are going. How can we do that? Inquired Little Raven. A war party leaves scouts behind. If we try to follow the Kiowas before it gets dark, those scouts will see us. If we wait until it gets dark, the Kiowas will be too far away. Listen sharp, my brothers, and I will tell you how I propose to do this thing, said White Otter. It would be foolish to follow along this hill. If we do that, the Kiowas will see us. We will do something different. We will cross over this hill, and ride away toward the place where the day begins. If the Kiowas are watching, they will say, "Hi, those scouts were hiding behind that hill. Now they believe we have gone away. See, they are going to tell their people about it. They are riding toward the Cheyenne camp. They must be Cheyennes. We will keep going toward the Cheyenne lodges. Then we will circle around, and try to find the Kiowas. If we do not find them over there, we will know that they have gone to fight my people." "It is good," agreed Sunbird. "We will go," said White Otter. They crossed the ridge, and rode boldly away toward the southeast, in the direction of the Cheyenne camp. They had little doubt that sharp-eyed Kiowa scouts were watching them. They glanced back many times, but saw nothing to confirm their suspicions. Toward the end of the day, they came in sight of another little grove of cottonwoods. They circled about it many times before they finally ventured within arrow range. The grove was unoccupied, and contained a tiny pool. They killed several sage grouse in the timber. "It is good," said White Otter. "We will stay here until the sun goes away. Then we will circle around and try to find the Kiowas." At the end of the day, they left the grove and rode off toward the north, hoping to cross the trail of the war party. Twilight had already fallen upon the plain when they finally found the fresh tracks of many ponies. The trail led toward the east. The Sioux felt sure that it had been made by the Kiowas. "Now we know that your people are safe," declared Sunbird. "Yes, I believe it is true," replied White Otter. He was gazing thoughtfully across the plain. A new possibility had suddenly suggested itself. He felt certain that he had guessed the destination of his foes. He turned eagerly to his companions. "Now I know about this thing," he told them excitedly. "I believe those Kiowas are going to fight the Cheyennes. Yes, now I see how it is. They took us for Cheyennes. They tried to fool us. When we went away, they circled around and came over here. Yes, yes, those Kiowas are going to fight the Cheyennes." "I believe it is true," said Sunbird. "Now we know about it. Well, we will not follow them. We will go back and look for buffaloes." White Otter was silent. His friends saw that he was thinking about something. They waited for him to speak. "The Cheyennes are our friends," he said at last. "Once we went with them to fight the Pawnees. Once we went with them to fight the Kiowas. We took away some good ponies in that fight. The Cheyennes are very brave. Red Dog, their chief, is our friend. My brothers, I am thinking about these things. How do you feel about it?" inquired Sunbird. "I will tell you," said White Otter. "We are Dakotas. The brave Cheyennes are our friends. The boastful Kiowas are our enemies. A Dakota helps his friends and fights his enemies. I am going to tell the Cheyennes about the Kiowas." "It is good," declared Sunbird. "Hi. We will go to the village of our brothers the Cheyennes, and help them fight the Kiowas," Little Raven cried, enthusiastically.